Okay, so new year coming up. Time for some predictions. Gonna get things started right. Get a nice video in on Wednesday. Wednesday's a good day to make videos. I don't want to set a day for myself, but whenever I think of something, I want to put it down on video. And I like to brag to everybody. The receipts are online. In 2016, January 3rd, I believe it was. I was drunk. I was still drinking quite a bit back then. And I predicted on January 3rd, 2016, that motherfucking Trump was going to win. And why did I think that? First of all, I wasn't a Trump fan then. I'm not one now. There was a little window of time there, maybe last year, when I wanted him to win the election because he was up against Biden. I admit that. Honestly, I'm rather embarrassed that I ever supported him at all. I fell off of my hardcore libertarian roots for a little while. I felt that, if Trump didn't win and Biden won, the world would fall apart. I didn't think the world would fall apart. I thought that Trump might be able to fix some things in our government for a window of time consisting of a few months. I lost my way for a while. I should have known better. But in 2016, January 3rd, it's on my Facebook, I predicted he would win. And the reason I predicted that, I also predicted, I think that day, that on that post, I predicted a war in Syria, which we got close to. A war with Russia over Syria, which we got close to. But the reason I felt that Trump would win the election, even before he got elected, even before he got nominated to the Republican Party, was because of all the media attention he was getting. And it turned out I was right. It was a lucky guess, really. But I said it loud and clear on my Facebook, so let's make a tradition of this. Let's do some predictions. I think a lot about inflation, and I think this is going to be a very turbulent year, primarily because of inflation. I think we haven't seen anything yet. Now, I brought up some charts here. Now, this is a good one. I found this on opensecrets.org, which I actually used to respect them. They're a little bit on the liberal side, and they definitely went into sort of a quasi-Trump derangement syndrome mode, but they're still fairly good. They're definitely skewed liberal, and I wish they wouldn't be. I wish they would be more nonpartisan, because I used to love this website back in, I was a liberal back then. I was a Democrat back then when I first got into this website. It's really good, though. They do mess with everybody. Now here we can see this chart's not so dramatic, but here's House re-election rates, 1964 to 2018, and you could see little dips here and there that basically correspond to recessions. Here we have the 1990 recession. Here we have the 1982 recession. Re-election rates dropped. And then in the 70s, we can see some pretty dramatically low re-election rates. Now look at this. U.S. Senate re-election rates, 1964 to 2018. Obviously, the sample size is going to be a lot smaller. But just look how dramatic the drop in re-elections were in the late 70s, early 80s, when inflation was really at its peak and the economy was really suffering. Now, as we know, in 1982, I believe it was, Paul Volcker stepped in to save the day, raised interest rates to something in the mid to high teens. I think the overnight lending rate was in the teens. But another thing they did, at the behest of the politicians, obviously, because it is the politicians who are responsible for appointing Federal Reserve Chairman, Federal Open Market Committee Chairman, or whatever they're called. So obviously the chairman is beholden to the politicians. So then they decided, hey, let's change these CPI rules a little bit. Let's kind of, we want to make it more accurate. So we're going to muddy the waters by adding concepts and sort of calculations such as owner's equivalent rent and quality substitutions. And others besides. Obviously, we know why that was. It was because of these low retention rates right here. The Senate is who confirms appointees like the Fed Reserve Chairman. Obviously, the senators would have pushed Volcker to do something about, to do something to mitigate the political fallout from CPI numbers in the future. They couldn't just tell, the Bureau of Labor Statistics or whoever does the statistics. They couldn't just tell them, "Hey, we're not doing CPI anymore because it makes us look bad." Even in America, despite even given how absolutely brain dead the electorate is, that probably wouldn't have flown over too well. So they said, oh, we're going to add these little things, quality substitutions. It's going to make the CPI better, more accurate, more realistic. But really the whole purpose of it was to make the CPI less accurate so that politicians could get away with fucking up the economy even more. So that's an interesting graph. So obviously there's probably some politicians right now sitting in their cushy, townhouses in Georgetown. And one thing you could say about politicians is they really, really, all of them, I have yet to see one recently. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but all of them seem to really, really want to keep their jobs. Must be a pretty good job. Most of these guys up in D.C. in the Congress are substandard fourth-rate lawyers that couldn't make it in law, so they went to politics. That's the first thing I wanted to look at. This year is an election year. Inflation is not going anywhere, though. This is the thing. So, in the 1970s, they made every excuse in the book for inflation, saying, first of all, Arthur Burns saying that it was temporary, saying that, oh, don't worry, it's just the El Nino that's causing the inflation because it disrupted the fisheries off the coast of Peru, and the anchovies that were fished there are used in fertilizer, so that would increase the prices across the board. So that was an excuse one year. And then another year it was, oh, it's the oil, it's OPEC. So year number 2, his excuse was, oh, it'll pass, it's just OPEC. And then year number 3 was a different excuse. It was, he went through basically every excuse over several years. And basically just denied that inflation was happening. And we saw a little repeat of that this last year. The inflation really started. Let's look at our favorite site, Fred. It really started picking up. And let's make this chart a little bit smaller. Here we go. So we start to really see it start picking up. Here goes January. We could see we had the little deflationary thing there because of the useless lockdowns and the useless COVID measures that didn't stop anything. We start seeing in January 262 to 263 went up 1 unit. February, 263 to 264, but almost 2 units. And then we start to see it accelerate. From here, from January all the way until what? September, October, the Fed was saying that this is transitory. From here to here, okay, we can call that the transitory period, for lack of a better term. Okay? And it's been accelerating ever since, and I don't see any signs of it stopping. Now, why is that? What is this really just a supply crisis? Well, yeah, there is a supply shortage, but it's not it's not even solely the COVID disrupted a lot of things. But we have a much bigger problem on our hands. You know, one of my favorite things I saw recently, I got into a little debate with somebody, and he said, oh, he's a standard liberal, he's a community college teacher, he's a cog in the wheel, so he's always going to support the Democrats because it serves his interests as a community college professor or instructor. But there's a little short I saw the other day, and this is so true.
Panasonic ERJ H-Series high-temperature chip resistors are automotive-grade thick-film chip resistors with a 175 degrees Celsius maximum category temperature range. The ERJ H-Series incorporates high-temperature resin coating and...
There are not enough people. I can't emphasize this enough. There are not enough people. I think one of the biggest risks to civilization is the low birth rate and the rapidly declining birth rate. It is, and yet so many people, including smart people, think that there are too many people in the world and think that the population is growing out of control. It's completely the opposite. Please look at the numbers. If people don't have more children, civilization is going to crumble. Mark my words.
Is this why you have so many children?
I'm trying to set a good example. Yeah. Gotta practice what I preach.
I won't ask you to predict.
So this is so true, and the reason I wanted to show, I saw that the other day, and it was just after I had this little, mini debate with somebody, and he was talking about how the world's overpopulated. I said, oh my goodness, are you serious? He's a community college instructor, a math guy. He's not a stupid guy, but he is a fucking cable boomer or a cable Gen Xer. He's completely oblivious to what's going on in the world. He doesn't pay attention to the news, but when he does, he goes on like CNN.com or watches, World News Tonight or whatever. So he's completely clueless. But we have this issue right here. Let's see. Labor force participation rate in the last 20 years. Just look at this steady drop over the last 20 years. That's people retiring more than anything else. That's the population getting older, okay? And so you have less people in the workforce, okay? And then that coincides with this. The labor productivity growth, annual percent changes, non-farm business sector. Basically, our labor productivity growth, which is, I believe, the growth of productivity per worker is extremely stagnant, and that has to do with the aging population. Okay, so you have less goods and services, less of anything, whether it's goods or services, being produced in the economy. And some may say, well, that's fine because China's, our factory, and China can do all of the producing for us. Well, we don't need to produce anything, at least not goods. Services, yes. So that's something that even China can't do for us. But, China, as everyone knows, is having, I had something here. Median age 38.4 years. That's very old for a median age in anywhere. China is having its own demographic crisis. They're producing less. Okay, so that means less goods and services, less goods being produced for consumption worldwide. In addition to that, the cost of living has been going up pretty exponentially in China. That affects the prices of goods shipped overseas. So this is not just a supply disruption. This is a much broader sort of trend in the see, what do we have here? Share of old age population 65 years and older in the United States. So what I showed you earlier was the labor force participation rate, which has been dropping, and that's mostly because the share of 65 and older has been rising pretty exponentially. Okay, so just in the last, let's say the last 20 years, we've gone from 12% to 22%, almost double. And what does the government do to keep the economy going? What do the politicians do in order to keep their jobs? Well, as we know, they just decided, hey, let's just throw cash out into the economy to keep the voters happy so we can keep our jobs. Not only was there this, now this is M2, not M1, so that's a little bit more representative of cash in the actual real economy. M1 looks like a hockey stick. M2 is not quite so dramatic, but compared to the last many, many years, our money supply has grown quite a bit in the last year and a half. We're talking 30%. Okay? So we have an aging population, lower productivity, stagnant productivity because of the aging population. And the government, the politicians just want to throw money at the situation. They're throwing gasoline on the fire, as Peter Schiff would say. So, long story short, this inflation is not going anywhere. There's nothing that the government can do about it. Everybody, normies will say, oh, they can just raise interest rates. Yeah, that worked in 1982 when there was barely any debt in the system compared to now. I'm not talking about even government debt. Forget about the government debt. We're talking about corporate debt, consumer debt, things like student loan debt. If they raise interest rates, that would destroy the economy because our economy relies on debt to keep going. So they can't raise interest rates. They will raise interest rates, but they're only going to raise them a paltry 1, 2, 3%. And then shit's going to hit the fan and they're going to cry uncle. So they're going to keep... So my predictions are this, based on that, is they're going to keep the American population as complacent as possible for as long as possible. Maybe the whole year, maybe not. You're going to see a lot of Republicans run on the basis of that they have the answer to inflation. They don't. They can't do anything. But they'll run on it. And then when the Republicans take over, won't make a damn bit of difference. The inflation will continue because this is a systemic issue. COVID kind of COVID really disrupted things and exposed the vulnerabilities. But the vulnerabilities were there. This was going to happen anyway. Really, what COVID did is people that would have retired years from now, maybe 2-3 years from now, they all decided to retire last year. So it really jump-started this demographic crisis. But this demographic crisis is not going anywhere. Inflation will get worse and worse. And when the brain-dead population finally figures out that their revered government can't do anything about it, then shit will really hit the fan. Inflation has been the downfall of many empires. The Spanish Empire. The Spanish Empire, they had gold currency, but they had gold currency, but the problem was they mined so much gold out of the New World and started minting so many coins that it caused massive inflation that brought about the slow decline of the Spanish Empire. The French Revolution, the famous march of thousands of poverty-stricken women from one end of Paris to the other because they were upset about the price of bread. You have a gaggle of thousands of poor women, mostly, that show up at the gates of Versailles. They couldn't just massacre these people. And then the government showed its weakness. Its legitimacy was gone at that point. When those women showed up on King Louis's doorstep and the king had no answer, he couldn't brutally suppress the uprising because they were women, then all of a sudden the gig was up. Legitimacy was lost. The most important thing for any government is not the amount of money it has, not the power of its military. The most important thing is the belief in the people of that government's power. The belief of the people in that government's ability to govern. Once it loses that, and it can happen very suddenly, the whole thing crumbles down. And this has happened over and over in history. China is a very good example. They even have a name for this legitimacy. It was called the Mandate of Heaven. Okay? And oftentimes these collapses are caused by things like inflation. Because when the people see that a regime has no power to stop a crisis, well then the people say, what's the point of us paying taxes to you and obeying your laws when you can't protect us and do what you're supposed to do? That's the point of a government. There is that social contract. So this year, I saw, where was it? Producer Price Index. If you look at the Consumer Price Index, which I just lost it, let me do it again so I can compare these two. Let's just look at the Consumer Price Index. This is the main one. Let's shorten this graph if I can. Consumer Price Index, you're seeing rises in the last month. Increments 276 in October to 0.7 to 278.8. So that is 2.1. Increment of 2.1, which I think was 0.9% month over month. So that's a 2.1 increase. Producer Price Index last month went from 240.2 to 243.6, 3.6. And the baseline number, 240 to 243, those are lower numbers than 276 to 278. So what you're seeing is a much faster increase. in producer prices. Now, the producers have been supposedly, resisting raising prices because I guess some of them actually believe the government. These are people that run businesses, and they actually believe the government. I guess they were kind of playing a game of chicken. Who's going to raise prices first? Maybe we can wait this thing out. After all, the Fed says it's just temporary. Nobody wanted to be the first one to really start raising their prices a lot. Well, that's going to change next year. Here goes the first story, Daily Wire. Let's go to news. Gas prices. Here we go. Most likely growers will have no choice but to raise prices. Just going through these stories, and you're seeing that food producers, oil, fertilizer prices, USDA, of course, a department of the government currently under the Biden administration, is saying that food inflation will cool in 2022. We'll see about that. I don't know about cooling. Maybe it will stabilize, but it will remain at elevated levels. With the energy prices especially going up so much, that affects everything. So do food prices. With the labor shortage, that pushes wages up, which also adds to inflation. These producers, these businesses have been holding off raising prices. Next year, people haven't even begun to see the inflation yet. And the politicians are going to finagle their way around it as much as possible. And for the most part, the American population will buy their bullshit. And probably the Republicans will take over Congress on the platform of inflation, something which they can do nothing about. They have no answers for inflation. Nobody does. Okay, because we can't raise interest rates. And like I just displayed, the whole problem is much more systemic than even just too much money being printed in the system. You have a lot of money being printed into the system, sure. In fiat currency, its days are probably numbered, at least hard fiat currency. We may move to digital fiat, basically, which is crypto, and we'll see what happens with that. But this inflation will continue, and people are going to start demanding the government do something and expecting the government to do something. And the politicians will lie and say, hey, we have a plan and this will definitely stop inflation. And the people will buy their bullshit and vote for them, whoever they are. I mean, on the bright side, at least a lot of incumbents will get kicked out on one side. But I'd like to see the incumbents across the board on either party get wiped out. But so that's going to happen this year, and it's going to continue into the following year. Eventually, maybe 5 years from now, or less, I would say. I can't see it lasting much longer than that. You're going to see a tipping point at which the people finally realize that they're going to be suffering very badly. All of us are going to be suffering really badly. And then the people will realize that the government has no answers. They have no solution. And that's when the real fun begins. Because once the government loses that legitimacy that they've had for so long, I mean, they're losing it fast as it is. It's been sort of a chipping away. these scandals, all the corruption, it's chipping away at the inflation. But if there's a major crisis like inflation, a major monetary crisis due to systemic issues, and the government has no answer and they just throw in the towel, then you're going to see some real shit happen, because then the legitimacy is gone. They've lost the mandate of heaven at that point. Okay, so where are we at on time here? Can't even see what my time is. Oh, I'm way over here. Okay, so we're at 30 minutes. Okay, we're gonna stop right here. I'm out.